All right, welcome. Hey,
Hi,
Brian, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
How's your boy? How's he feeling?
He's been in bed all day.
Aw,
Yeah, he's doing better than he was last night, but yeah, we're in the middle of class. He was in there throwing up, so I was like,
oh,
I gotta go.
no. I totally get it. That's
Yeah,
fine. I hope he feels better soon. Wish him a speedy recovery from me.
thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it.
Of course. Hello, Vardan Cheyenne and Shannon.
Hi, everybody.
hello.
All right. Well, let's get started. Um,
Shoot.
so Marge, did you need something?
Oh yeah, I just want to remind you about the recording. So
It's
you're going to
on.
send
Yeah,
me the,
we're recording already. But
and
thank
are
you.
you going to send me the next grouping though to send?
Yeah, send me an email so I remember. But
Sure.
yes, I will. I'll get that to you. And anybody who needs a class, I can send that to you as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Let's begin. This is actually one of my favorite lessons in basic Judaism too. We're going to learn today one of my favorite stories from the Talmud, and I would argue it is the basis in a lot of ways of the conservative movement and of conservative Judaism. So we're gonna get to learn a lot today, and the focus of our topic today, or our conversation today, is really going to be on the dynamic nature of Torah, because we Jews have been around for a long time. We've gone through many different periods of history, sometimes where we were in charge of ourselves, sometimes when we were not. There have been good years and bad years and everything in between. And somehow Judaism has survived through all of this. And there's a lot of different reasons, some historical, some religious. But for me, one of the reasons is the fact that our tradition is dynamic. The fact that we can look at the modern world and address it, even though, the Talmud never talked about anything that had to do with, CPR or artificial hydration and ventilation or any of these sorts of things. We're still able to utilize our halachic framework, our Jewish legal framework, to be able to respond to whatever the needs are. And that's something that is not only important within Judaism, but I would argue is crucial, right? It is crucial to who we are, and it is crucial to our ability to survive in all different places throughout the world, in all different times, and in all different periods of history. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the dynamic nature of Torah. And when I talk about Torah in this case, we're going to see that it doesn't just mean the 5 books of Moses, right? We've spoken about Torah and a few of its traits. We've talked about it being sort of one of the modes of revelation, right? It's the momentary revelation, if we talk about it at Sinai, but it can also be the continuous revelation as we learn, as we grow, as we go back to it, as we use it to expand ourselves. We can continue to get more and more and more out of it as well as other things. But I want to talk a little bit about sort of what I call Torah with a capital T versus Torah with a lowercase t. Now, in Hebrew, you can't do that, right? The Taf in Torah is the same. There's no capital and lowercase letters in Hebrew, but in English, right, we can designate Torah as a proper noun and Torah as a concept noun by the capital versus lowercase t. So when we speak about the Torah, capital T, what we're talking about is the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses. But we've also mentioned that there is something called the oral Torah. And the oral Torah is the entire scope of all of our learning and all of our rabbinic literature throughout all the histories. So if you think about it, Torah is not just, capital T is the momentary revelation. Lowercase t is the continuing and continuous revelation. that we have as we talk about who it is that we are. So, the question then that comes up is, how do we maintain a vibrant and developing religion with all of these sources that represent a different time in history? Actually, now I can't remember which one it is. Rabbi Ern and I just did a podcast that spoke a little bit about this and about the dynamic nature of Judaism and how it's traveled and gone through history. I don't know if it's this week or next week's, but you can listen to both and let me know. Okay, so that's the question, right? How do we maintain that dynamic and ability to adapt? And what we're going to see today is that it's actually built right in to our tradition. And it starts in the written Torah. It starts in Deuteronomy, right? And Deuteronomy 30, so it's towards the end of Deuteronomy, we have this very strange passage. Surely this instruction that I enjoin upon you this day is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond reach. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us that we may observe it. Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and get it for us and impart it to us that we may observe it. No, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to observe it. So what is this biblical passage saying to us? What do you get out of this biblical passage? No thoughts? Rona?
It's for everybody and it's accessible.
Good, right? We are not a religion that says, oh, you have to be one of these top people in order to understand or to read our books or to understand our traditions, right? Our tradition, Torah, is for everyone. Everyone can learn it. Anyone can learn it. Not a problem. It's fully accessible to everyone. Good. I like that. What else?
It seems like it's personal.
It's personal. I like that, right? It's not just, it's to the other person. It is saying this thing is very close to you. And that's in the singular, elecha, right? Not you plural, y'all, right? If you come from the South, but you in the singular, to each and every one of us. David, can get close to this, can learn it, can make it a part of my life, and every one of you can as well. Good. Ebony.
I was going to say that it's not like esoteric, where the part where it says it's not too baffling, like it's not confusing or too, like you don't need a degree or a master's or a doctorate to participate or understand.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because sometimes people say, hey, this is hard. Like, you guys are in my Beit Midrash class. Like sometimes it's tough stuff that we're talking about. So what's interesting is, the English word baffling here is a translation of lo niflate. A nifla is like a miracle, right? This isn't miraculous stuff. This is real life stuff. And it may be difficult to learn, or it may take effort and energy to learn, but you're able to do it. If you put the time and effort into it, you're going to be able to, right? It's not unattainable or unachievable, right? Nor is it beyond your reach. Good.
I was just going to say, because you, when you said you can, and it is accessible, but there's also a piece that it's like but you also have to take it upon yourself to do it. It's not going to just happen for you.
Yeah. Yeah, look, there's no doubt that it's not gonna, just be served up on a platter, so to speak, right? We're gonna have to go out, we're gonna have to learn, we're gonna have to struggle with it. That's what Yisrael means, to struggle with God, right? So that's all part of it, but it's doable. It's not impossible, and it's doable for anyone. It's doable for anyone. Good. I mean, this last line, Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od. It's very close to you. It's right there, right? The Hebrew is very powerful, right? B'pficha ulvavecha la'asoto, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you will do it, so that you can go observe it. So this is going to come back in our Talmudic passage that we're going to learn today. Okay, and we're going to learn from a section of the Talmud called Baba Metzia. When we get into the history section, we'll learn a lot more about the Talmud, but the short version of it is that the Talmud is a strata, a layer of rabbinic literature. It's one of the most prolific and profuse that we have, and most of the writings of the Talmud were written between 200 and 500 CE. There are actually two different Talmuds. There's one that was written in the land of Israel, and there's one that was written in Babylonia, which is where a lot of the Jews and the rabbis were at the time. And so, interestingly enough, it was the Babylonian Talmud that became known as the Talmud. It is by far the largest of the two. If you can see behind me, the Talmud is the first three shelves, both sides, right? That's Talmud. So it's a lot. There are those of us who study Talmud on a regular basis, and there's a way to do it, a traditional way to do it, that is called Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi means you learn a page a day. A page in the Talmud is actually two-sided, right? There's an A side and a B side to page 2, and an A side and a B side to page 3. So we learn a page a day. I'm actually doing that this year, or this cycle. And if you do that, it will take you 7.5 years to go through the entire Talmud. Right? So we're about 2 years into this new cycle now. That I started, right? And we're going to go through, and by 7.5 years later, we will have gone through the entire Talmud. So it's big, it's a lot. The section that we're going to be looking at comes from a tractate called Baba Metzia, which is talking for the most part about civil law. It's some of the Baba sections are like torts. If your ox runs into my ox and neither of us have insurance, like, what do we do? Right? Those sorts of things. Baba Metzia at the beginning actually talks about returning lost objects and the duty we have to do that. So we're looking at Baba Metzia, and we're going to look at a section kind of in the middle of all of it. It starts as follows. We learned in a Mishnah somewhere else in Masechet Kelim that if one cut an earthenware oven widthwise into sections and place sand between each and every segment, Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure. Because of the sand, its legal status is not that of a complete vessel, and therefore it cannot be susceptible to impurity. But the rabbis deem it ritually impure, as it is functionally a complete oven. Now, we don't need to get into the details of all of this, but think about it as like the sand being the grout between tiles. That's how they used to do things, right? So instead of having a grout that was more wet, that hardened, they would put sand in there, and they would pack the sand down, and they would put more sand in, and they would pack it down, and they would keep doing that. And eventually there was enough sand in there that it functionally sealed everything down, and the tiles couldn't move. That's how they would do it. So what do these ovens look like? We don't know exactly, but probably something like this, where you can see in between here, you can see these tiles, right? That were the base. And it's those tiles that we're talking about that has the sand down below. So don't worry about the details of the oven right now, because our conversation is going to go into a different direction. But I wanted you to at least picture what we're talking about. Everybody good? All right. So the text continues. This is known as the oven of Achnai. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of Achnai, which is a snake in this context? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said that it characterized the manner, in that manner, due to the fact that the rabbis surrounded it with their statements, like this snake, which often forms a coil at rest, and they deemed it impure. So the rabbis would argue and argue and argue all these different arguments for why they deem it to be impure against Rabbi Eliezer, who argues that it is pure. So think about this. It's one rabbi against all the rest of them. Now our story continues. The sages taught on that day, when they discussed this matter, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinion. But the rabbis did not accept the explanations from him. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if halakha, if the Jewish law is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. And the carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits, right? So they're having this argument. And Rabbi Eliezer said, if I'm right, this carob tree is going to prove it. And the carob tree got up and walked 100 cubits. How far is 100 cubit? About 150 feet, right? A cubit's about 1.5 feet. And some people say it went 400 cubits. But the rabbis respond to him and say, one does not cite halachic proof from a carob tree, right? We don't take our arguments from carob trees, sorry. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, then the stream is going to prove it. And the water in the stream turned backwards and began flowing in the opposite direction. But they said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a stream. We don't learn from streams. We don't learn from carob trees. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, then the walls of the study hall will prove it. And the walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. But Rabbi Yoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of Jewish law, what is the nature of your involvement in the dispute? In other words, he turned to them and said, you walls butt out. The Gemara says the walls did not fall, right, because of the deference to Rabbi Yoshua, but they didn't go back up straight because in deference to Rabbi Eliezer, and they're still leaning askew today. If we found that house, we would see these houses, maybe this is the Leaning Tower of Pisa, I'm not sure. Right? So what do we have here, right? We have logic has failed. Rabbi Eliezer couldn't convince them by logic. They keep rejecting everything. So he goes to miracles, right? He has a miracle of a carob tree, a miracle of the stream going backwards, the miracle of these schoolhouse walls, study house walls that are going to collapse. And all of these, the rabbis basically say, we don't accept that as a legitimate argument. I don't know, I'd be pretty impressed if I were them, but maybe for them that was commonplace. So finally, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. And a divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer as the halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place? God came and said, Rabbi Eliezer is right. Now, if we weren't Jews, that'd be the end of the story, right? Usually God comes in. That's kind of the final word in all of this. But that's not where our story ends. Watch what happens. Rabbi Yeshua, same guy who yelled at the walls, Rabbi Yeshua stood on his feet and said, "It is not in heaven." He quoted the Torah passage we just learned in this context, right? What is the relevance of "it is not in heaven"? Rabbi Yirmiyah said, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice. As you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, Achrei Rabim Latot, we go after a majority. Exodus says, how do we solve this problem? We go according to the majority. Since the majority of the rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halacha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. And that's the law in this. God came down and said, Rabbi Eliezer is right, but the law is in accordance with the rabbis. Talk about chutzpah, talk about hubris, right? But it is something, this is the core of how we understand Torah and Jewish law. We talk about Jewish law not as something that happened a long time ago, but something that is happening right now. And therefore, we have a process for how we deal with that, right? In this case, the process in Exodus 23:2 is when you have something that is baffling for you and you don't know the answer, you go according to the majority. That's the law. So even though the carob tree, the stream, the schoolhouse walls, and God came down on Rabbi Eliezer's side, the law still goes according to the rabbis. I mean, imagine that. Can you think of any other religion that would sort of say, sorry, God's word isn't the final word, right? But it's because we have ownership of our tradition. We have ownership of this tradition and the legal process. So that is probably where the original story ends. But there's a little postscript to all of this. I believe it's a later edition. It follows immediately after this. I believe it's a later edition, and it's very interesting. You can imagine this would make people uncomfortable. So here's the story that concludes it. The Gemara relates, years after, Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be God, do at that time, right? When Rabbi Yeshua told God, back off, you're not in this fight, right? What you say doesn't matter in this. What did God do? And Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be God, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. It's kind of like for any of you who are parents and have kids that are teenagers, right? There's that moment when your teenagers actually use your own rules and your own logic against you because they figured it out. And it's both an incredibly frustrating and incredibly pride-producing moment, right? Because it's frustrating because you're arguing with them and they're right, and but there's this sense of pride that God has, that the people of Israel, that the Jewish people have owned this and says it's ours. It's not in heaven anymore. It's ours. It's for us to think about, for us to do, for us to make work in our world. And that is incredibly revolutionary for what you're going to see in many other religions. And to me, it's very much, I think, the basis of conservative Judaism, right? That we own it. It's not about, oh, well, this is what we did 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Okay, so what? What about now? Is it still relevant now? Is it still meaningful now? Now, that's the conversation that we should have. And so, really, right, the question for us is, and what I'd like for us to talk about and hear from you is, right, what is this? How does this inform our relationship? What does this mean for our relationship with God and tradition? right? We've been talking about creating our own theology, our own philosophy, our own way of our own relationship with God. So what does this do for our relationship? How does this play into your relationship and the way that you see your relationship with God? And I'm actually going to stop the share so we can see each other better. What do we think? March. You have to unmute yourself though. Sorry.
I think it's confusing.
Okay.
I mean, the reason I really resonate with conservative Judaism is interpreting for our times and for us.
Mhm.
Yet some of the interpretations don't resonate with me. So it's like, so do I use my own I mean, I do use my own, but should I be using my own? Or since I say I'm conservative, should I be doing the conservative model as it's presented? So that's what, and the rabbis don't always agree with each other either. So you're going with the majority, so you might be going with the minority, but you're supposed to go with the majority. So that's why I find it confusing.
Yeah. So look, it is confusing, and one of the things we have to understand is that the Talmud was written by rabbis for rabbis, right? It wasn't actually written for the general population, because the general population at that time especially was illiterate and they weren't able to read it. And so this was written by the rabbis for the rabbis. And so this is sort of jurisprudential process, how we manage disputes among the rabbis. When it comes to the people who are not the rabbis, right, the law is find yourself a teacher and follow that rabbi. So the rabbi of your community is the one that you are supposed to follow when it comes to these sort of halachic legal questions. And then if the rabbi doesn't know, then it kind of gets put out there into the larger world of rabbis. And in the conservative movement, what that means is it goes to the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards. And that is a committee of conservative rabbis that deals with issues that are either too complex or too large in scope for any one rabbi to sort of deal with. And the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards actually goes according to the majority. That's how they work. They have a potential of a minority opinion as well, because the Talmud always maintains a minority opinion, but they go according to the majority in terms of what most people are going to follow. Other thoughts? Ebony.
Well, I was going to say that a couple things. First, I think it's really reflective of like the willingness of like Judaism as like a religion to engage in like nuanced discussion that doesn't necessarily have like it does have an answer, but that it is open to discursive debate. And I think that's like one of the beautiful things about Judaism. There aren't many like honestly religious leaders who would be open to saying that something is confusing. And I think that it shows a lot of intellectual humility on the part of Judaism as a religion to be open to saying like we're, imperfect understanding of very complex issues, and that's okay. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely creates a different sort of model than we normally see out there from religious figures, because usually religion means I have the answer. For most religions, right? I have the answer. And I would be so bold as to say Judaism is very different in that way. Judaism doesn't say we have the answer. Judaism says we have the process. And the answers may change. depending on the question and the circumstances and the situation and who's involved. But we have a process that is given to us. And that's sort of the difference, is this halachic process. And this is interesting because, you know, people will often say, well, is that true of Orthodox Jews as well? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? Orthodox Jews may be a little bit more reluctant to allow for modern questions to weigh in the process, but the legal process is the legal process. And Orthodox Jews had to figure out what to do with defibrillators just as well as conservative Jews did, and just as well as Reformed Jews did, right? They had to make a decision about electricity and whether or not it was permissible on Shabbat or not permissible on Shabbat, in the same way that conservative and Reformed Jews did. Now, the answer they came to in the process may be different because they're using different parameters and they're pulling different levers in that process in terms of how to get there. But I have always understood Jewish law as a framework. And it's not about the detail, it's about understanding, well, these are the boundaries. And if you're in the boundaries, then you're living a Jewish life. And if you're a little here and a little there and a little there, that's okay. But if you're in those boundaries and living within that halachic, that Jewish legal process or that Jewish legal framework, then you're in the game. You're in bounds, so to speak, right? As we mentioned, there are certain things that are going to put you out of those bounds, whether it's belief in Jesus as your personal savior, right? There are certain things that are going to be out of bounds. But for the most part, if you accept Jewish law as something that is valued and binding and follow the legal parameters, you're gonna be at which conservative and Reform and or Orthodox do. You're going to be living within those halachic parameters. Good, Ebony. Anybody else? Nobody?
Well, can I ask a follow-up question really quick? Sorry.
Sure, Ebony.
When you're talking about like living within the bounds of Judaism in the framework of halakhic law, what does Judaism say about like Jewish, because Judaism is an ethno religion, what does halakhic law say about like ethnic Jews who do believe in Jesus as their Lord and Savior? Like, are they like there's no excommunication, but where do they stand in like Judaism?
Right. So look, it's not such an easy question to answer. There are contradictory legal concepts that we have to sort of weigh. So on the one hand, we have the concept of Yisrael, afal pi shechata Yisraelhu, which means a Jew, even though they're a sinner, is still a Jew. Right? You almost can't, even if you convert out, there's a part of our tradition that says you're still Jewish.
Right, yeah.
Right. Once you're Jewish, you can't get rid of that. So that's on the one side. On the other side, somebody who has left Judaism and is espousing things that are not within the bounds of Judaism, right? Is called an apostate, or you can say apostate or heretic, or all these sorts of words, but they're outside of the bounds, whatever word you want to say. And what I would say is that somebody who lived that way and then wants to come back into Judaism would need to actually convert back to Judaism and make that commitment. You could say, well, but they were always Jewish all along. No, at a certain point in time, if you're not espousing Jewish beliefs, and as we saw, right, belief in Jesus as a personal savior is not within the bounds of Jewish belief, then you're no longer part of the Jewish religion. You may be ethnically still connected because you can't get rid of that, but you're no longer living a Jewish life. And if you wanted to come back into that community, then you should probably go through a process of reintegration and re-entry.
Very interesting. Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, of course. Anybody else? So for me, right, these sources that we learned today come back to the beginning conversation we had on the first week of Basic Judaism 2, which is a relationship with God is just that, a relationship. And that means, A, there needs to be work and intentionality and attention to that relationship, just like we would have with any other relationship, with a spouse, with a friend, with anybody like that, right? If you ignore a relationship, that relationship is going to suffer. The relationship is going to be damaged. It may not go away, right? But it's going to be damaged. It's not going to have that same closeness, that same ease that it would if it was a relationship that was being tended to and cared for, right? And so our relationship with God is just that. And it changes. And it changes person to person. And it changes between different time frames, right? The way that we conceive of God, the way that we in the 21st century think about God is very different than the rabbis of the Talmud or the Israelites who left Egypt. And that's okay. That's okay. We shouldn't say, oh, well, we have to think of it like that. No, we have to think of it as how it's meaningful today. And if we do that, then we're much more likely to have that rich relationship that is going to support us and nurture us and comfort us when we're struggling and celebrate with us when we're happy. And that's ultimately what we're looking to try and do in our relationship with God. And everybody's going to do it a little bit different. That's okay. That's okay. As I said to you at the very beginning, right? If you ask me to describe my mother and my sister to describe her mother, you would get two very different people. A description of two very different people. Each person's relationship with God is going to have its own unique attributes and its own unique quality. Other comments or questions before we end today, and we'll touch base very briefly about what's going to start next week. No?
Well, if I could ask just one
Please.
more question.
Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, my thought was like, when you talked about this framework that, which I love the way you talked about that Judaism doesn't necessarily provide an answer for every like million unique cases and scenarios, but it does provide a process for us to evaluate those things under. Would you say that is like the Torah versus Judaism? And if that's the case, like what was going on in pre-Torah times? Like with Abrahamic like situations and Moses, like what was, I mean, I guess, was that Judaism or was that just pre-Judaism, if that's like even a thing? I'm not sure.
So look, there are three covenants, right, that we talk about between God and us. The first is with God and all of humanity. That was the covenant that God made after the destruction at the time of Noah, right? That God would never again destroy the world by flood. So that first promise was to all of humanity. The second two covenants are with us as a Jewish people. The first one through Abraham, right? And that was a covenant of relationship. The second one was at Sinai, and that was the covenant of, well, so I would say the first one is covenant of individual relationship, and the second is covenant of communal relationship. So we don't become the Jewish people until Sinai. We're the Israelites before that, right? The children of Israel, the children of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. But we don't become the Jewish people until Mount Sinai, when we received Torah and until that moment. That doesn't mean, though, that God didn't have a relationship with our ancestors prior to that, which we saw through Abraham, Isaac, and through Jacob. But that was a personal relationship that God had, as opposed to a communal relationship. And you'll notice that, we now sort of use an intermediary for the communal relationship, and that was Moses. Moses was the one, and sometimes Aaron, was the one who sort of spoke for God, because we as the people couldn't handle it. It was too much for us. So we sort of maintain both of those in modern time. We have a personal relationship that we sort of look back at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and say, yeah, this is my God, right? And we have a communal relationship that we nurture together as a community. And both of those are there.
Yeah, very interesting. Having a lot of thoughts, but that's really interesting for me to think about and marinate over this week.
Next Shabbos, you can corner me and ask me your other thoughts.
Okay, good. I will.
Good. Any other questions? March, unmute yourself. It will always mute afterwards. You always have to unmute.
Oh, but I have no memory. Do we need to sign up for the next class? Because I didn't see it.
Yes, you should sign up. I mean, I believe Bonnie will send everybody who's currently in the class a reminder, but if she doesn't, the best thing to do is to go to our website and the calendar.
Okay.
The next class begins next Tuesday, a week from today, Basic Judaism 3. It's going to be Jewish history. If you haven't signed up yet, do so, and that way we'll have you on that roster. And it's going to be co-taught. I will teach most of it, but Elisheva Edelson is actually going to teach 4 of the sessions. And her expertise is Jewish history. But when I'm away with the community in Rednitze and in Israel, I didn't want there to be 4 weeks without there any classes. And so Elisheva will teach those, and then I'll come back, I think, for the last class. We'll talk about the syllabus next week. But as I said, it's going to be on Jewish history, and we're actually going to start for 2 weeks, first 2 weeks, talking about Passover, so that we can get ready for Passover, which is coming up fast and furiously. And then we will go into Jewish history. And Passover obviously is a holiday that celebrates history, but it'll be very focused. The first 2 weeks will be focused on Passover, and then we'll move into sort of a survey of Jewish history, going from everything to what happened with Adam, Abraham, I would say, not really Adam, Abraham, going all the way until, what happened yesterday in Israel, and modern anti-Semitism and all of those sorts of things. So all of that will be covered in the next session, or the next series. But thank you for asking that, Marge. It reminds people to sign up. Once again, if you go to our website, go to the calendar, click on that first day of the class, and it should link you in to be able to sign up if you haven't done it. Some of you already did. I think Vard, I saw that you had already done it. So I know some of you already did. All right. Well, the good news is we don't have a hiatus. We don't have a break. So I will see you next week as we start to talk about Passover. Start to think about it. Maybe get your Passover questions. We will learn Passover kind of the same way we learned about Shabbat and Kashrut, where we'll talk about the first session. We'll talk about the themes and the ideas. And then the second session, we'll really focus on the how-to and what to do. All right, everyone. Have a great, great week.
Bye.
Okay, Toda, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Chitty.
Thank you.
Bye, all.